Okay, welcome class to testing randoms. A lot of you have randoms in your game, and I think it's a really great idea because it actually makes your game a lot more interesting, adds a element of reality to it and some adversity because you never know really what you're going to get. But when it comes to testing your code that has randomness in it, that's really the problem, is it's random. You don't know what you're going to get the next time you ask for another random number. And you can see here in the math.random class, if I call it 5 times, I get 5 different numbers. And if I call it another 5 times, I still get 5 more new different numbers. There's another random class available to us in the Java library, and that's the java.util.random class. And it's a very powerful class, but it also suffers from the same problem. Every time you call it, you get a different number. And every time you call it again, you get more different numbers. So how am I going to test that if I can never predict what the number is going to be? How do I know how to test the return values of my functions that are based on random numbers? Well, as programmers, do we know any way possible to make our random numbers less random while we're testing them? Of course, during the game, we want them to be really random, but during our test, we need to be able to predict. So one of the reasons I recommend using the java.util.random class over math.random is the random class allows you to set a seed value, and the seed value puts the random number generator into a known state. And from there, it generates the exact same sequence of numbers every time. You can see here in this example, with the seed value of 101, the random class generates these sequences of integers. And I invoke the same random number again in a different instance of the program with another 101 as the seed, and I get the exact same sequence of numbers. It's very predictable. And just so you know, I'm not just printing screenshots. I've got a seed of 102, and of course we get a different sequence of numbers. So the key is in the seed. Now, what you're going to want to do, and I recommend this is something that's just for your benefit as a Java programmer. You want to get familiar with how to read the Java documentation because there are thousands upon thousands of useful functions available in the Java standard library, all wrapped up in utility classes and other classes that help you do everything that Java does. Go to this URL, which is the URL for the Java 8 documentation on Oracle's website. When you get there, you're going to get a window that's divided into 3 panes. In the top left pane is the list of packages in the Java standard library. So I scrolled down and found java.util. And then in the bottom left pane, I get a list of all the interfaces and classes that are defined in the java.util package. And I scrolled down and found random. So I clicked on random. And then finally in the main panel, I got the actual documentation for the random class. And you can scroll down through this class and there's some amazing functionality there. Don't worry if you don't understand it all yet, but it's a very powerful class. And that's also a very powerful way to browse the documentation. So try to get familiar with this. There's a lot that you can understand about Java just by reading the docs. Now let's figure out how we're going to test our class that has some randomness built into it. The first thing we need to do is we need to design our actual game class, our project class, with testing in mind. So there's a couple of ideas, a couple of tips that you ought to take into practice. The first thing is we want to create a random object in our class and hold it in our class. And we're going to default it to the normal case, which is what we want for our game. We want a seedless random, so it just takes whatever values and it truly is random. We're going to use this random object that's defined up here on line 12. We're going to use it anywhere we need a random number. So down here on line 25, we're going to call next double off of that random object, and it's going to provide the next double, which is exactly what we want. Now, here's where it becomes magic for testing. If we provide a method that allows our test class to set a different random number generator, you can see here we replace our random object with a new random object. The test class can provide a random number generator that has been created with a seed, and then the numbers are predictable. So that's where the magic is in testing this. So if you look, If we create our own random object and seed it with a value of 100, we're going to get a specific sequence of numbers, 0.722, 0.195, 0.667. If I know that sequence of numbers, then I can create my randoms with that in mind. So I can actually write my test after I create my seeded random and I set it in my application class. Then the application class is going to use that to create the random numbers, and it's going to give me my 0.722, and in my calculation that comes back as 72.2 and 19.5, etc. So because I know what those values are going to be, I can write tests more effectively. I don't have to do a lot of guessing. I do have to figure out what Java is going to give me for those, and that's maybe something that we'll look at in just a second. There's another way to have total complete control over what the random number generator gives us. So when we run the tests, of course, they work because we know what the values were going to be. There's no randomness in them anymore. We knew what they were going to be. And that's great. But now we want complete control. And I just want to highlight here, don't get worked up about this not being a random number. It's only not a really random number when we're testing it. When the game is running, it's really a random number. But in our tests, we need that predictability so that we know our code works and we're not having a test work one time and fail the next. So what you want to do is, I wrote a class that you're welcome to take and add to your project. It's called random mock. Mock is the term that we use in the industry to indicate that we're faking something up. So random mock actually inherits from the random class in java.util, so it can be used anywhere that random is used. But the difference is I created it in such a way that you can pass it the list of random numbers you want it to produce. So now I have absolute control. I don't have to run something to see what Java gives me. I give it to myself. So I create my random mock, and it is a random object. I pass it into my application class using the setRandom method that we created. And now I can just use it. And I can see if I passed in the 0.2, I'm going to get a 20 back. And if I passed in a 0.3, I'm going to get the 30 back. So I know exactly what my values are going to be. I don't have to waste time trying to figure out what Java is going to give me on a seed. I can just give myself the values and my tests work great. And it still works. My application code still works when it's running live in a game, because we've already tested that the random number generation stuff works. And if you have to worry about random numbers being generated out of bounds for, valid bounds for your game, well, you could have a test that created invalid random numbers, and you can test that your logic catches those. So by having total control over what the random number generator gives you, you can write really effective tests in a very short amount of time. So how would you use this? Well, go to my GitHub repository and grab this class, copy it down to your project, and I recommend that you put it in your NetBeans project in your test package right next to your test classes. And if you do that, don't forget to edit the file and change the package teacher helps to package whatever it is in your project so that it compiles right. And then from there, just enjoy being productive in your coding. If you have questions, problems, please contact me in the Hangout or in the discussion board. I look forward to hearing from you, and I hope this really helps.